Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Zimbabwe is a failed state. And one of the signs that it is a failed state is that it cannot provide even the most basic needs of its people. The country used to have a very good quality education system that has since collapsed. Decades of failing to pay teachers living wages have forced many teachers to leave the profession, and many have left the country. Healthcare service, another one. It has all but collapsed. What is annoying to most people would be the fact that the ruling elite are living in luxury. The country is going to host the SADC summit in a few days' time. In the picture there is a fleet of trucks that have just been ordered and delivered. They've got the stripe of the Zimbabwe Republic Police, so they will all be issued to the country's police force. It's an impressive lineup. What is amazing is the regime security services are well equipped, at least comparatively, than the nation's healthcare. The situation is so bad that most of our people are having to rely for their healthcare needs by traveling outside the country. South Africa, Botswana, Zambia, Mozambique, for basic healthcare needs. It is therefore not surprising that our neighbors have begun to complain about it. Here is an ANC leader complaining about that very fact.
Yeah, if you don't have food and money, for goodness sake, your neighbor has got. Why don't you speak to your neighbor? Neighbor, we're hungry. Are you able to help? You don't just tell your kids, no. Lunchtime, just visit them. And you throw them away you throw them away to our neighbors and close your eyes. It's unfair. And I want to say this publicly, even though they are sensitive. When Poppy Ramaphosa was being attacked by all and sundry, during that period when she was attacked, she received a letter of a patient sent to South Africa by a GP in Zimbabwe. The lady has got cancer, stage 4 already, and is anemic. And he's sending and say, please give that lady a pint of blood. In other words, one country asking another, give. Yes, I'll tell you why that is abhorrent to me. Blood is not manufactured. We get it from the population. There are human beings in Zimbabwe. They've got blood, lots of it, for that matter. Yes, they've got blood. All they need to do, if they don't have the technology of taking that blood, is to come to South Africa and say, look, can you help us with people who are going to get people to donate blood in our country? Instead, they close their eyes and throw over the border. It's unfair. And part of the reason is that heads of states on this continent, and it's the only continent, when they are sick, they go to other continents, leaving their nationals alone. And we have asked that must stop.
This is a ward where patients are being treated under a tree. If you can zoom in, you'll be able to see the drip bags hanging by the branches of the tree. And I suppose what you can see in the foreground there is the dirty water flowing. That is a ward. Those are seriously sick patients being attended under a tree. That is what Zimbabwe's health service has become. It is little wonder then that many Zimbabweans are going to neighboring countries. The incident the gentleman was talking about there, that someone has to travel to South Africa to get a pint of blood. It is heartbreaking. Do we really have to travel to another country just to get a pint of blood? But this is what has become of Zimbabwe. This is what has become of Zimbabwe because it's a failed state. What I find refreshing about this incident is the very fact that not too many moons ago, ANC, the gentleman there was wearing a cap on which it was written ANC. ANC was propping up the Zanu PF dictatorship. For the last 2 decades, ANC has propped up Zanu PF. In November 2022, knowing that Zimbabwe was gearing for its 2023 elections, ANC passed a party resolution in which they undertook that they would not allow regime change in Zimbabwe. Of course, they knew Zanu PF was going to rig those elections. And the message was very clear. Go ahead and rig the elections. We will not allow regime change. So we'll let you get away with a rigged election. And lo and behold, Zanu PF did rig the 2023 elections, albeit with the help of the corrupt, incompetent, and utterly useless opposition Triple C party led by Nelson Chamisa. But that's another story. And although SADC election observer team condemned the election process as flawed and illegal, SADC, as the regional body, accepted that damning report, but they did not do anything else. And President Ramaphosa and his ANC friends were 3 of Africa's heads of state that attended Mnangagwa's inauguration last year. And there's no doubt that the ANC played a key role in making sure that Zanu PF was not denied legitimacy. Fast forward to May 29, 2024, this year. The election results in South Africa denied ANC the absolute majority the party had enjoyed the last 30 years. That was the game changer. ever since losing that absolute majority, ANC have stopped propping up Zanu PF. What the gentleman was saying there would have never been expected to be issued by anyone, any member or party leader of ANC, openly criticizing Zanu PF. It is totally refreshing. Here is an interview soon after the election, the 29th May election results were out, where the ANC, the leader, Secretary General, was sitting very uncomfortably when his fellow South African was telling him in no uncertain terms that ANC must stop its blind support of Zanu PF.
Our international relationship is going to really be based off what is good for South Africa, and ensure that this countries respect the rule of law. We will not be associated with dictators and with countries that actually does not respect the human rights of their own countries. Not that we will interfere directly in their affairs, but we will make it really very clear. Like I can give an example that I always use. It's Zanu PF in Zimbabwe. I mean, it's going to be almost impossible, not difficult for SA to have relationships with Zanu PF. Looking at their history, you know, making Zimbabweans to be all over the world, including being here in South Africa, creating a massive challenge for us in South Africa. Zimbabwean people deserve to be in their own country. Got a beautiful country, lots of potential, but unfortunately when you have a party like the Zanu PF, which are friends of the ANC, I really find it difficult for a current government to be associated with the Zanu PF. I mean, it's beyond imagination.
Well, it is the game changer. I believe that with the changes in South Africa, Zimbabwe now has the chance, a real chance, to deliver a meaningful change in our country. We cannot afford to have this failed state continue anymore. Nearly 50% of our people now live in abject poverty. This is economically, socially, and politically unsustainable. We are gearing for the SADC meeting, and many human rights activists, nothing to do with CCC supporters, albeit that some CCC are also planning to hold a demonstration. I believe those people have the right to hold peaceful demonstrations. But Zanu PF is mobilized to stop those demonstrations going ahead, for the simple reason that the regime does not want to be reminded that they rigged the 2023 elections. They do not want to be reminded that they are illegitimate. But the truth of the matter is, they rigged the 2023 elections, and they are per se illegitimate. The country's biggest challenge, in my view, is to make sure that the coming elections is not a repeat of last year's elections. It is unbelievable that nearly 2 million Zimbabweans participated and actually voted for Chamisa in last year's election on the basis of Chamisa's lie that he had plugged all the vote-tricking loopholes. And 3 to 4 million Zimbabweans, mostly in the diaspora, cheered and applauded the participation. That was a fatal mistake, unforgivable, because every Zimbabwean should have known that those elections were flawed, and that participating in the flawed elections will only give Zanu PF legitimacy. How many times do we have to be reminded of that? It is absolutely unforgivable. I believe that SADC, although yes, there were other SADC leaders like President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, who did not want regime change in Zimbabwe, as if Zimbabwe was some bantustan province of South Africa, where it's no longer the people of Zimbabwe who have got the democratic right to say who governs the country, but rather ANC decides that. Still, nonetheless, if Zimbabweans had not participated in those flawed elections in their millions, I believe even the ANC would have found it very difficult to refuse to deny Zanu PF political legitimacy. Now that South Africa, there's been political change in South Africa, we have a chance. We have to focus our minds and efforts to make sure that 2028 elections, either the democratic reforms are implemented so that they are free, fair, and credible, or we do not participate in the flawed elections and give Zanu PF legitimacy again. That is the Holy Grail. That we must deliver without failure. What is happening in Zimbabwe is tragic. When you hear somebody has got cancer and has got to travel all the way to South Africa for a pint of blood, it is heartbreaking. Meanwhile, like our friend in ANC correctly pointed out, the Zanu PF leaders themselves, the ruling elite, they can afford to go further afield for all their medical health needs. As we know, the late President Robert Mugabe used to travel to the Far East for his medical needs. In 2012, when Tendai Biti was then the Minister of Finance, he admitted that at government expense, Mugabe had made no fewer than 8 trips to have his eyes checked in the Far East, and each trip costing a cool $3 million US. Can you imagine? 1 year. That's a cool $24 million US. how that money could not have been invested in building and equipping one eye hospital in Zimbabwe, beggars belief. He would have benefited, and so will millions of other fellow Zimbabweans benefited. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of Zimbabweans today who have lost their eyesight because the country cannot even do some of the simple operations like the glaucoma operation. I have met Zimbabweans who are now blind because the country cannot afford to carry out such operations. This is how tragic the situation has become in Zimbabwe. I believe the gentleman in South Africa is absolutely right. As much as South Africa has been very helpful in allowing Zimbabweans to be treated in that country, it is without doubt becoming a serious burden. And I think it is straining the relationship between the two countries unnecessarily, particularly for a country like Zimbabwe, which, if our economy was being run properly, there's no reason why we would have functioning hospitals and schools, proper roads, etc., etc. 44 years of rigged elections is the reason why Zimbabwe is a failed state. We need to address that problem. And we need to address it with a sense of urgency that the matter demands. I've been asked on several platforms, what is the way forward? The way forward is very simple. At the present moment, as much as Zanu PF has got all the reins of power, controls parliament, everything, all the state institutions are Zanu PF controlled. The opposition cannot be trusted to deliver anything. I believe ANC, Nelson Chamisa and company will never, ever deliver any democratic change in Zimbabwe, and therefore free, fair, and credible elections. What he would do, and what he has done again and again in the past, is con people to believe that the opposition are going to win. They've now got strategies of how to win rigged elections and entice people to participate in flawed elections. Once they've participated, they've given Zanu PF legitimacy. And Nelson Chamisa and company, they can go and claim their share of the spoils of power, the few gravy train seats. And so the system has continued. The only way to stop it is to stop people participating in these flawed elections. It's not going to be an easy task because these 2 million supporters who voted for Chamisa, they have got this personality cult mentality. They believe in him without understanding what is going on. That is the problem with the personality cult mentality. Without changing that personality cult mentality, Zimbabwe will not get out of this mess. And trust me, It is in Zanu PF's interest. It is in Triple C's interest, Shamisa and Company's interest, to keep the people ignorant, naive, and gullible. So we have got a task to make sure that these people open up their eyes and their minds, and they can see the sheer futility of participating in flawed elections. Now that ANC has finally seen the light, we have a chance. We have a fighting chance of stopping this Zanu PF dictatorship and end this tragic human suffering that it has brought. Zimbabwe should not be a failed state. Indeed, a Japanese scholar who lived and studied Zimbabwe in the 1980s used to write and talk of Zimbabwe could be the South Korea of Africa in terms of economic advancement, peace, and prosperity. We took the wrong turn. Today, we have become the North Korea police state of Africa. We can change it. We must change it. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. Have a good evening.